Like, welcome to the Bardo. That should be the name of a podcast where we just talk about
The
dying while alive.
Dying into ourselves.
Oh, you can tell two Scorpios are about to lead this conversation.
Yep.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Frequency Broads. I am Victoria, and I am so delighted to introduce you to Phoebe Schiff, one of my dearest friends. She is a yoga teacher, retreat leader, and queen of manifestation. And we are so pumped to talk about this topic today. Being a spiritual girly in your 30s is not for the faint of heart, and dating is interesting to say the least. Phoebe is opening up her heart and being super vulnerable in this episode, and I'm so excited to hear what she has to share today. Welcome, my sweet love.
Thank you, Queen. It is so fun to be here.
All right, so we usually begin our episodes with a quick freak check just to tell everyone how you're feeling in your mind, your body, your heart. I'll start by sharing that I am coming off of a long weekend of house animal sitting. Whew, cats are such interesting creatures. One of the cats I was watching was in heat. So just to watch this very feral process of impregnate me, just the moans and the and my I feel like my very pure and I'm bleeding right now too, so I'm just what is happening? Hormones are so crazy. One of our last episodes Tara and I did was on hormones, so I'm just whew, I'm getting a firsthand experience of it. We're filming this the day before the full moon in Cancer, so there's just a lot of feels in the air, and I'm letting them do their thing and crying, laughing, perhaps at the same time. But just really happy to be here and talking about something that I'm forever humbled by the dating experience. And I feel like as a spiritual person who does all of these different modalities and practices, dating is one of the most spiritual practices you could put yourself in. And so let's break it down. But before we do, what's your freak check?
Well, first of all, I just want to honor and acknowledge your freak check. Imagining you watching a cat in heat, just that image really makes me laugh. And I remember during a freak check at a different point, you once described your heart as feral. So thinking of you witnessing the cat in that process, just that currently makes me feel some joy.
Let me tell you, a feral heart is very different than a feral body.
A feral cat in heat. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. My freak check it's so many things. I'm holding so many different things at once. I got really sick and I'm finally feeling better after that. So there's a part of me that feels my witchy powers coming back online, which is feeling really, really good. I taught 2 of my yoga classes this morning. They were huge. They were vibey. So I'm really riding the high off of that. And simultaneously, as we record this, the fires are still burning in LA. I have a lot of close friends and community who are impacted by it in different ways. And I'm just feeling into a lot of grief and a lot of suffering. And I can say that from, the safety and luxury of being at a distance, but also witnessing my friends just go through all these different processes that you do not think about. So holding a lot of things at once, as always. Yeah.
Yes. Well, yeah, deep prayers for the friends and family in LA. And it's so interesting to watch people go from conspiracy theory to climate change to then no, let's be present. People need their basic needs met right now.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you send them the love and support when they're like, I literally own nothing and everything
Right.
I worked for is
Totally. And then, there's the really egregious examples. And then, for example, among my friends, I'm supposed to be in a wedding in Calabasas this fall, and the bride is checking in with me, letting me know whether the venue is still standing, you
wow.
know. And another friend of mine evacuated, but the winds are picking up where she is. And so it's such a just
Mm,
dynamic situation.
yeah.
And my very compassionate Pisces rising is doing her best to, witness and hold the space, but not get just pulled into the unbelievable amount of sadness and suffering. So, yeah.
How do you do that?
Oh, that's a good question. Really good question. And I mean, it's all about coming back into my own body and my own experience. And after spending a lot of time on Instagram or watching the news or texting friends who are going through it, I can feel like I'm there.
Hmm.
And so my practice has been taking a breath and coming back and looking around and being like, I'm safe. The air here is clean. I'm okay. How can I use my energy, my resources, my intuition to support? But that's something I'm needing to do probably dozens or even hundreds, uh, you know, times a day because it can just feel so easy to get sucked in.
I know. And then it feels silly to switch over to talking about dating and best practices but this is how we operate in life, right?
It
And just
is. And I think, for myself, when I'm going through crisis, I know some of the girlfriends who I've been connecting with have been like, can we talk about something else? So
yeah,
for
yeah.
anyone who is impacted by the fires, either directly and indirectly, we totally honor and acknowledge that and let's let this be some fun playtime to put our focus on something else.
Let's. We all want to love and be loved, and partnership is one of the most transformative experiences. You can really get to know yourself, heal yourself, and share your life with someone else. And dating seems to be this mountain many of us climb in order to find partnership. And, climbing the mountain is whatever you make of it and your perception of it. And it's so easy to get discouraged and disappointed when you go on countless dates and you just don't resonate with anyone. And you are such a special gem of a human being. So I would expect that there aren't as many men out there, And here's the thing, like I think so many people think of it as like a data um roll of the dice. Like if I go out on so many dates, I'm bound to meet that person, right? And I think from what I've witnessed with you is you really are so tuned in to who you resonate with, who your body responds to. And I want to just like open it up with, how do you approach dating? And I know you've been taking a break for a few months now. You held a retreat in Joshua Tree a few weeks ago, and like you're getting back into your routine here in Portland. And like where do you begin, right?
Mhm.
Like there's the apps, there's the process of like setting up or reactivating your profile, which is like a fun activity, right? But how do you energetically prepare yourself to start dating again?
Ooh, such a good question. So much to say here. And if you are a spiritual girly in your 30s, I mean, it really doesn't matter what age. I think the 30s have this charge to it
Mhm.
because there is this cultural idea that it's when you're supposed to be at a certain place.
Wait, we're all very feral. We are cats in heat in our 30s.
Exactly. And also there can be this programming that like if you haven't found partnership in your 30s, it's over.
Yes.
And I've spent a lot of time really looking at all of those stories. So I'm 35. I'm single. I live in Portland. And sometimes like just those circumstances can be enough for people to say like, I'm never going to meet anyone, you know? And so I guess what I want to start by saying is that the best thing to do to prepare yourself for getting back on the dating scene is to release as much pain as you can from your past experiences. Much easier said than done.
Yeah.
Because feeling into the grief of what has happened or what hasn't happened in past experiences is so important, and what ultimately is holding us back when we're not having the dating experiences that we want to have. There's usually baggage there, either from dating or from other parts of our life that are showing up in dating. And so I think like starting out by taking as much time as you need to grieve your last experience. And a lot of people do something, which I've done in the past, which is to jump right back into dating right after a dating experience. And if there are a few points I'd really, really like to sort of impress upon the listeners who are looking back to get into the dating scene. And one of them is take as much time as you need to grieve. And that's really hard and humbling because I think for a lot of spiritual women like myself, we want to think it just wasn't in alignment. I'm fine. Witch cackle. Like we want to just like swipe left on the whole experience and be done with it.
I'm like, wait, swiping left is no. Yeah. Okay.
I think so. Yeah.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Swipe it. Yeah. And so first of all, just admitting to yourself that you are feeling pain from a past experience and allowing as much time as it takes to move through that first step. And then also, as you get ready to get back on the dating scene, coming to terms with the fact that you will probably feel pain again. Like, yeah, may we take a breath with that. From my perspective, pain is the cost of entry for anything that has to do with the heart. And to have a meaningful experience in dating, to really open yourself up to people, there is the very high risk that you will feel pain if it works or if it doesn't work. And coming to terms with that it feels so important to me, because if you go in being like, well, I just don't want to get hurt, I'm like, I don't know if this is where you should be spending your time. And for spiritual babes, our gift is consenting to the pain that we may experience from dating, and trusting in our process of digesting and metabolizing and ultimately alchemizing that pain into something new. But I think like really sitting with your relationship to pain, either from the past or the pain you might feel in the future, is so important if you are going to show up in the dating game with integrity.
Oh my God, I love that so much because I carry so much betrayal trauma. And it's really hard to sit with betrayal trauma when you're single and you're living your best life and you're doing all the self-care things and you're just not having to face it, right? Like it's really easy to tuck that one deep in your closet and be like, I'll maybe get to that eventually. And then you meet someone and you start dating and you're like, fuck, here it is.
Yeah.
Here is this pain.
Yeah. And that is the blessing and the curse of dating, is that it will dredge up aspects of your trauma that you cannot get to.
Yep.
And so another, and you know me, like a big part of my process with dating is having support. I have a therapist, I have a dating coach, I have other mentors, and some might think that's excessive, but for me, wanting to date with an open heart and wanting to date to eventually meet my husband, I know that I am going to experience pain. And I think the biggest sort of myth I want to debunk is that experiencing pain doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
It actually means you're doing something right. I am at the tail end of my healing process from my last dating experience, But the pain I felt in some ways was from the beauty of our experience and our completion process. It wasn't because a guy did me wrong. It was because like we had this really meaningful experience and realized that the versions of ourselves that we were at the time weren't vibing. And so it's so important to just be really honest about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm always looking at the polarity of an emotion or a situation or whatever it is. And, pain and pleasure go hand in hand. There's so much pleasure within the dopamine hit of someone matching with you and then someone asking you out and having that first date that's very magnetic and electric and fairy tale like. And that high of the hormones is so addictive. And I think a lot of people tend to date around a lot because it's enjoyable. That's pleasurable. But anything further than that is painful, and you have to face yourself and you have to do the work and you actually have to like really communicate. And I want to get to that in a little bit. But okay, so you sit with your pain, you are feeling ready, you're getting a yes, you download the app. What comes next?
So I've really changed how I create my dating profile after working with a dating coach this year, and also just my personal evolution. This sounds intuitive, but it's not always what people do. Be authentic in your dating profile. And that word authentic I feel like can be overused. So let me sort of break it down. Show photos of yourself doing the things that you like so that men, I'm speaking in heteronormative terms because that's my experience, but obviously this can apply no matter what your orientation or dating style is. And show things that you like to do that might be polarizing. I think so for a long time, I was creating my dating profile in a sort of people-pleasing manner. I wanted to be liked.
Yep.
So I just put up, what I thought to be my sexiest photos. I put, not sure what I'm looking for. And I was creating it from a place of like what I thought men wanted to see.
Yes.
Which was completely backwards. Now, I create my profile in a pretty polarizing way. And this is like kind of progressed over the last couple of years. I'm very honest with the things I like and I don't like. So I am not a big fan of cats. I am not a big fan of live music. This is going to hurt for some of the nature people, but I'm not a fan of camping. And in Portland, which is where we reside, that became something I needed to own and claim because a relationship, it didn't completely end because I wasn't into camping, but it had a lot to do with it. And so at a different point, I pretended to like all of those things in order to be liked. And it didn't work out because it wasn't authentic.
I'm like, wait, because I'm guilty of that as well. And I feel like that's the fastest way to get yourself a lesson in, hey, you're not being authentic with yourself. So I love that you're pointing this out because it's so, we all want to be liked, right? But not the intention of this is to find your person. If you are searching for a long-term partnership, right? Not just to like
get the likes,
disassociate or get the validation.
Right. And that takes a certain level of emotional maturity because at one point, I just wanted to get as many likes as possible.
Yeah.
But then as I started to really realize who I was and what I wanted, I was like, I actually want to get way fewer likes, but knowing that a man has read through my profile and seen what I'm into, seen that I'm into yoga, seen that I'm into spirituality, that I love the sauna cold plunge, that I don't want to go camping, that if he has a cat, like we'll talk. and so it actually makes the matches that come through so much more quality because they are like, authenticity, magnetism is polarizing. So it's going to way more powerfully draw in the right people and then way more powerfully repel the wrong ones. And that I'm at a point in my evolution where I really see the value in that. The people pleaser version of me would have been horrified.
Yeah.
Like, absolutely horrified. I also started putting like, I'm looking for my man, serious inquiries only.
Yes.
Which was super interesting because then just like the type of men that are reaching out they're serious. And it's not that there's anything wrong with casual dating, but it's when you're pretending that you want that when you really want something else, which is how I spent the better part of my adult life, that you're disappointed. And so this is where you really get to like shape it to make to show yourself as much as possible through your profile so that you can be felt.
I love that so much.
Yeah. Yeah. And a bikini photo goes on there sometimes, but it's just such a different energy. And then what also has shifted is I'm not getting guys just reaching out and saying, hey, And at this point, if someone reaches out that way, I'm not even interested. I once had a guy, this was actually a very special moment. Shout out to, I don't even remember this guy's name on Hinge. We never ended up going out. But he sent me a voice note with him playing a song on the guitar introducing himself. And I was like, okay, like this is what I am here for. Like, you're going to, but by being authentic with what you're looking for, you're going to attract men who are authentic enough with themselves to express in a way that's maybe like a little bit different, which I loved that.
I love that. So I'm like, serenade me.
Yes.
So, okay. I've always been a fan of lists. Like, here are the qualities, the traits, and knowing like in true manifestation, you don't hold tight to like everything you've written down. Right. And so I've started to look at like, I deserve this. And I started reflecting on, I love wordplay. Deserve is really, here's what I'm willing to receive, because serve is here's what I'm going to give. Here's how I'm going to be of service. But I deserve this really gets you clear on what I'm willing to put up with, what I want, like what is going to bring me joy and pleasure and like alignment. And so I'm curious, how do you format? Do you go the list route? Do you say like, this is my man on a piece of paper? Have you ever done that exercise? I'm sure you have, right?
Dozens of times. And my thought process and my experience of it has evolved over the years. So probably 5, 6, 7 years ago, that list was very different. It was, it had a lot of things that feel a lot less important now, like height, like looks, and I've dated a lot of guys who are over 6 feet tall and have very little else to offer. And so I think you start to learn through experience. Like,
I can't help but grin at the camera because I'm like, let's call you out.
Right. Well, and it's also on women for thinking that being above 6 foot is pre-qualifies you in any way.
I know. Pre-qualifies you to wear heels and not tower over a man. Like, okay.
Right. Exactly. And, and you even saw me when I like kind of went through this shift of being like, I'm open to meet a short king. Like, short kings have swagger. And then the next guy I met was like probably 5'8", 5'9", and I adore him. I'm not in contact with him, but I still feel so much love and tenderness for him. And if I'd had this strict rule to stick to my list, 6 foot or over, I would have missed out on that experience. So I think just like allowing your list to evolve. And sometimes you need to like experience dating a short king or dating someone over 6 foot who brings very little to the table to kind of arrive to that. And then I think the other part of the list that's really shifted for me, drum roll please, is instead of seeing the list as qualities for your partner, it's really qualities for yourself.
Yes. Like how my partner makes me feel.
How you are treated, because a huge part of my process this year has been treating myself in the ways that I want my man to treat me. And, I think people can say that sometimes and it doesn't have meaning. So I can kind of unpack what that means. Like, I really desire a man who makes plans, who is intentional with experiences. And so I can either like sit here and wait for that and, just be waiting on the couch for that, or I can create my own experiences. I put a lot of thought and effort into my 35th birthday. Like, I planned a very intentional trip for myself with a whole bunch of things that I love. And I could have sat back and been like, I'm single. No one's going to plan this for me. Like, boo hoo. I just planned it myself. And it was killer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I don't need that from a man. I do desire that from him, but that's something I'm able to offer myself. And then just other small details, like a big thing that I want to feel with my man is safety. And I think that's a universal thing for feminine beings.
Yeah.
We have this desire to feel safe. There's a woman I listen to. Her name is Alison Armstrong, and she wrote the book Queen's Code, which I recommend to any feminine being on the dating scene. And one of something that she says is that safety and sexuality for women is the exact same thing.
Yes.
So when women feel safe, women feel sexual. And what's so interesting is that in the past, I was always chasing men, trying to get them to make me feel safe. But they just like weren't at a place to be showing up as that type of person.
Yeah.
And so it took a shift in my healing journey, my nervous system, my belief system. I mean, this was some major overhaul for me to see safety as the number one thing on my list to really want. And what I mean by safety is emotional safety. The safety to go through the full spectrum of emotions, which as Scorpio queens is a lot.
Yeah.
But when we're met in that, in some ways, like the rest of the list kind of falls away. You're like 6 foot what? Like, you make me feel safe no matter what I'm feeling, no matter what point of my cycle I'm in, no matter what mood I'm in. And so that has also required me to be safe enough with my own emotions. So if I am becoming the list, I've had to be a safe space for me to experience the full range of my emotions, which include things like jealousy, like attachment, like envy, like disappointment, like resentment, a whole bunch of low vibe things that like I don't really want to claim. But if I'm wanting a person who's ultimately a reflection of me to show up in my life, who makes me feel safe in my emotions, I need to be that for myself first.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really curious when it comes to emotional safety. Is this something that you feel like the man should come pre-qualified with? Or do you think it takes some sort of like working around or working together to figure out like, hey, here's what I would like from you. Are you able to provide this? Because I know a lot of women, we just don't want to like train a man. And of course, men don't want to be trained or told what to do. And yet so many men struggle with emotional vulnerability or have the idea that, okay, I'm solution oriented. I can fix this, when all we want to do is be held and heard, period.
Yeah. I mean, I think for the depth of emotional safety I'm wanting from my man, he has to be that emotionally safe with himself.
Yes.
And that's a challenging process for anyone to go through, especially men. But it does make the men that I do attract really exciting to meet because I'm meeting very special men.
Mm-hmm.
So the men that I'm meeting and am dating have done a tremendous amount of work on themselves and have found a certain level of like self-acceptance and self-compassion. And then the way that that shows up for me is it's something it's just something I feel. Like
Mm-hmm.
the last guy I dated, I felt very emotionally safe with him. And I just felt safe to own to him. I was like, I'm PMSing. I'm kind of all over the place. Like, I don't really know how to be right now. So I'm sorry in advance if I say anything. And what did he say? He was so sweet. He was just like, you're not doing anything weird. And if you start, I'll just make fun of you. But
Like, good luck, buddy.
right? But he was just like, but I'm here. And that does so much for my nervous system and like just being able to, because I have spent most of my adult life repressing my emotions, contorting myself to try and not let my emotions come through. And so to feel emotionally safe enough to just be like, I'm PMSing, I'm a little wild, I'm a little feral, like it's one of the most liberating feelings in the world. And this is available to you. This isn't like, I think sometimes when I hear people talk about dating, I'm just like, well, easy for you to say. But this becomes available to you when you realize it's one of your non-negotiables. When you finally realize that however tall a guy is or however much money he makes isn't nearly as important as how emotionally safe he makes you feel. It reorients how you approach dating and the types of people that you connect with and prioritize.
Mm-hmm.
But that takes like a journey of seeing that because, your ego at a certain point is just like, oh, well, like I'm going to feel safe with a guy with, what is it? Blue eyes, trust fund, 6'5", So
Yeah, I'm going to feel safe hanging out with my girlfriends and totally avoiding any type of depth and intimacy in my actual relationship. But hey,
Right.
teach their own.
Yeah.
I'm really curious when it comes to dating men within like a spiritual community or men who have like really done a good job of picking up spiritual jargon and terms and like using it to kind of seduce the feminine into making them feel safe, and then cut forward 6 months later, you realize they're a narcissist, and then everything unravels and you're like, whoa, shit, that's not what I thought it was. And then you're dealing with like different versions of reality and you have to come back home to yourself, and it's this whole process. And I'm really curious, are you able to kind of determine someone's depth in their like commitment to self-care and self-discovery and self-healing pretty early on? And if so, how and what do you look for?
Oh, such a good question. And as someone who's dated a lot of spiritual dudes,
Mm-hmm.
I've learned this lesson the hard way. So whatever a man tells you that he does, or however many crystals he has, I've dated crystal dudes. I've dated sound bath. I have dated many a spiritual man. I've dated men who have been in men's groups, who've been in therapy. What I've realized is that none of that matters if it's not integrated.
Mm-hmm.
And people can be doing all the things. They can be tapping and holding their crystals in their men's group. But if they're not at a point in their journey where the lessons are integrated, it's probably not the time for you to be dating them. And, I've because of the type of person I attract, I've dated a lot of guys who kind of lead with that and they'll use it to kind of lure me in. What I found is that they're still playing out certain toxic behaviors. And what I think the biggest thing I've learned with dating is to just drop all the physical material aspects of it.
Mm-hmm.
because whatever someone tells you or, tries to show off, it just doesn't mean anything. But the only way that you find out their level of integration is by dating. It's by seeing whether they have integrity, whether their words match their actions, seeing how they react to a trigger, a disagreement. And that's where you really find out who they are. And so what's been interesting is that there was a time where I was like, I'm only going to date really spiritual dudes. And then I had some really weird experiences where I was like, okay, this doesn't pre-qualify you as safe. There's actually a lot of men who work on themselves and are connected to their hearts. They're not spiritual in the way I am, but they feel a lot safer to me than sound bowls did. I mean, I felt really unsafe with a sound bath healer at one point because they are in integrity with themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that you learn. And so I'm really into the Neville Goddard style of manifestation. Some people may be into that. And Neville Goddard speaks a lot about neutralizing circumstances. And so in the same way that I can neutralize the circumstance of me being 35, of me living in Portland, of me being single, and not make that mean anything, I can also neutralize the circumstances of whatever men bring to the table. And, if they're leading with some material thing, like I have this amount of money. I mean, sometimes guys on dating apps will literally put their salary, and I'm like, okay, that's interesting. I mean, I can understand where they're coming from, but the circumstances don't matter. It's an energy and an integration game. So whatever someone tells you is not nearly as important as seeing how they react in an uncomfortable moment, seeing how they react to surprising news, seeing how they treat you when you're PMSing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the real stuff. And so my list now is so different than it was because that's the real stuff.
Yep. Oh, I'm so glad we talked about that because okay, while it's one thing to be, super aware of yourself, you've done the work, you know what resonates, and maybe you really hit it off with a guy and you're like, okay, I'm in this. I'm feeling it. And then he cuts it off for whatever reason. How do you handle rejection, disappointment, and things just not ending up the way you wanted them to? Because as evolved as we are, we still like to play out the scenarios. And so I'm very curious what your take is on this.
Oh, I love this question. And I think sometimes the spiritual babe can be a little bit holier than thou, and myself included.
Same.
And be like, rejection is protection. And he just wasn't meant, this wasn't meant to be, I'm fine, back on the apps. No. I mean, I've done that. And I think is a form of spiritual bypass. And while, yes, I do believe on some level that rejection is protection, there's also pain and disappointment and grief to be felt.
Yeah.
And I come back to, there's a yoga class I've taught in the past about the goddess of disappointment. And I'm forgetting her name in this moment. But she is not like your Lakshmis or your Shaktis. She is old and withered, and I believe she rides around on this carriage that has smoke coming off of it.
She sounds like a Scorpio.
She sounds like a Scorpio. She could hang with us. Yeah. Her gift, though, is that she shows you where you are attached.
Mm.
And so disappointment is a revelation of where we are attached. And so if you feel disappointment about a dating experience that hasn't worked out, you're seeing, okay, I was attached to this in some form. how human of me.
Mm-hmm.
And what do I need to process the pain and grief of what happened between us? Or, you know, for me, sometimes a lot of times the grief is the future fantasy that I saw for us. And I'm at a point where I don't try and bypass that anymore. And sometimes, I mean, I have had very potent experiences with men in a month.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to kind of gaslight myself, honestly, and be like, it was just a month. Why do you care? But you can go very deep in a short amount of time with the right person. And so I think, kind of going back to how we kicked off the episode, just being really honest with yourself about the pain that it brings up. We all also know that this isn't just pain relating to the dating experience itself. This is the pain of our inner child. And I, this past year, did some of the most searingly painful inner child work I've ever done in my entire life, that was catalyzed by a month-long dating experience I had at the beginning of the year. And it ended abruptly and unexpectedly. And I was working very closely with my therapist at the time. So I had a really good container to really explore it. And it brought me to just some of the darkest and most painful experiences of emotional neglect and feeling unwanted and feeling separate and all of these different things. And it was not fun. Like it was really not fun. And I am so grateful for that dating experience for leading me through that healing process. Because me holding myself through that pain with the support of my therapist, who, I mean, I was having panic attacks in his office, flashing back to moments when I was young and I felt unseen. And, you know, I think emotional neglect sometimes is this thing we think about in very egregious instances of neglect where like your basic needs aren't met. And that wasn't my experience. I grew up in a affluent neighborhood. My parents were there in a lot of different ways. But when you're young and your needs aren't met in a particular moment, you create a story about why that is. And usually that story is something along the lines of, I'm not enough. I'm not lovable. It's easy to abandon me. And so I was carrying these stories from experiences where my parents just didn't quite meet me in the way that they needed. And this is no shade on them. Like, they were doing their best. And so dating has the capacity for us to get in touch with those moments, which nothing else can. And that's like the blessing and the curse of it. You know, it feels like it helps you get to just these very hard to reach parts of yourself. And so I think, kind of coming back to what you're asking about in terms of like moving through the disappointment, it's moving through the disappointment of the dating experience itself, and then the more deeply rooted trigger of the meaning that you're making, you know, because usually it's not just the experience itself, it's the story underneath it. You know, it's like, this guy left me and everybody leaves me, which may be a belief you picked up from when you were quite young.
Another saying besides like rejection as protection is, say he cuts it off, but then he kind of keeps you around, because I see a lot of people do this where they'll keep people as back burner. Oh, if I need a little validation or I need a little attention, or, you know, in every Mercury retrograde, I'm going to hit this person up. And that idea of, I don't want someone who doesn't want me, and having the strength and courage to recognize that, and ultimately the self-respect to walk away from someone who doesn't ultimately want you, or isn't able to give you what you want.
Yeah.
Because there's so many like lingering, frayed out dating scenarios. And what I like about your dating process is it feels very clean.
Clear. Yeah.
Under control. You mentioned that the last one.
I love that. Well, and I love that you brought this up, because I think almost every man I've ever dated has said, let's stay friends.
Yeah.
And at a different point, I said yes to that because I was desperate and attached. And honestly, just this past year, I reached a point where I finally, and again, this comes back to really knowing yourself, where I realized I can't be friends with someone I've dated.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. And there were 2 completion conversations, actually 3 that I had this year where I said very clearly to the men I was ending things with, like, I'm an all or nothing person. And that felt so good to own because for so many years, I allowed myself to be that person that you call during a retrograde or something because that to me felt better than nothing.
Yeah.
And I think this year was the year I finally realized there is no part of me that is casual. Like, I am a Scorpio. I'm healing from anxious attachment. I'm so intense when it comes to connection and relationships. Like, it's just not me. And that's not everyone's experience. I know people who've remained friendly with their exes, and that's incredible. But that is not going to be me. And it's actually felt very powerful setting that boundary with men and being like, this is goodbye. And I think for them on some level, like, the offer to be friends helps to offset the grief they might be feeling about something ending. They're
that's
like,
so true.
and so for me, it just, believe me, it's more painful in the moment to completely cut it off. But in my last experience, I was just like, the guy I was breaking things off with was like, maybe in a couple of months we can get coffee. I'd love, for us to be friends. And I was just like, that's just not me.
Here's the other beautiful thing is when you have all of these kind of like dangly, frayed, not wholehearted, relationships, it creates chaos when you do meet your person and then you have these kind of randos from the past, these back burners from the past hitting you up and then having to go through the process of being like, hey, I'm in a committed relationship now, or just like ignoring them altogether, right?
Right.
And so I think it really it's even more intentional than I think we're giving it credit for because you are making so much space for your person to come in
Yes.
fully and only for them.
Totally. And that has taken, it's taken some fire away from my ego because my ego would love
Yeah.
to have 3 or 4 guys who like text me every so often. Like from the men I dated in 2024, they could all technically be my friends and they could be hitting me up. And so in being complete with all the experiences, I'm releasing that little bit of ego validation I might get. But here's my thing. My belief is to, like, when you're manifesting, to create as clear of a channel and container as possible. And I want to make it very clear. I am calling in my husband. I am calling in my man. It has taken me so long to admit that to myself, to people, now to whomever is watching this. It took me an entire therapy session to say the word husband because I felt so much shame about wanting that for various reasons. And then I remember my therapist saying something like the word husband can be translated or the etymology of it is to care for.
Mm.
And so claiming that I want a man who takes care of me now just feels like the most natural thing in the world.
Yeah.
And I will clear the space of anything in between to allow the way I see it is the clearer and more potent I make my energy and my desire, the easier I make it for him to come in. And that, I think, if there's like one piece of advice to the spiritual girlies getting back on the dating scene, it's like clean up any of the loose ends. If one of my least favorite words in modern life is situationship because I'm so all or nothing. But if you have anything in the situationshipy realm, any like just anything that is in the way, cut it off.
Yeah.
Cut it off. It's dimming your magnetism and it's making it harder for your man to find you, from my perspective.
Yes. And go spend your time co-creating with your girlfriends.
Yes. Yes.
I was like, to those 3 guys from 2024, scram. She's busy with me going to cold plunge and saunas. But that, I love the like deep sense of respect that you have for your husband. And I had a dream about him that actually Phoebe and this man picked me up from the airport. And
I was just thinking
he was
about
hot.
this.
He was like a clean boy, kind of like Kinetic-y vibes. Just very just sweet and pure and genuine. And I know you so deserve that sexy, juicy man who's going to care for you, as we all do, if that's what you desire. But also, like, there's so much potency in like having a good girlfriend group in this process of either being alone, right? Like in the process of saying goodbye to anything that is like back burner what ifs, situationships, but then like cultivating deeper relationships with your girlfriends amplifies your potency and I think your ability to manifest, because you have this like tribe of women supporting you and just blowing their like smoke
Blessings.
of positivity
Yeah.
and blessings. Exactly.
That's true. And I think that's something that I really shifted in the last year, was deepening my female relationships. And I now see my female relationships as this both deep and wide network of support that help me in all things in life, but especially in dating, because as we said at the top, the cost of entry for dating is pain. And so knowing that, having a really strong network of women to help me process that pain allows me to move through it more quickly. It also, I think something that women can do sometimes is to want their man to be everything.
Yeah.
And that's too much for anyone. And so by having really strong relationships outside of your partnership, you allow your man to show up in the ways where he's really strong, but you're not expecting him to do it all. You know, I wouldn't expect him to have as much fun as you and I have on like our girl time days. Or, you know, even when I was sick last week and you brought me like coconut water and immunity shots. I mean, I was so touched by that. And knowing that I get to be supported in all these different ways.
Yeah.
I do also think there's something energetically about spending a lot of time with your girlfriends that kind of brings more potency to your feminine energy.
Yes.
So that when you are showing up in dating, and I am definitely calling in a more masculine man, I'm more polarized from spending quality time with women. And he, you know, the men I've dated have also had like healthy networks of men in their life. And that kind of strengthens both of our frequencies and our polarity. So that's another thing I've learned, like feels really good. Men who like don't have a network of men, I notice are different and sometimes a little bit like less resource. That I dated so many guys who fell into the kind of lone wolf archetype, which I think at a certain point you think is so like sexy and whatever. And now I'm like, that's actually not a great sign.
No, it's
like,
not at all.
because they need that same network of support as they're navigating things as well.
I read that scientifically, when men have had their testosterone depleted, if you know what I'm saying, that they need to go be around other men to help their bodies reproduce more testosterone.
Right.
Not reproduce, produce, whatever.
Yeah.
Tomato.
Yeah.
So I'm so curious if the same goes for women, where we're like, okay, but I think there's something also different in that like being in our feminine flow. And I do want to talk about this when it comes to dating and kind of there's so many definitions of like, this is what being in your masculine means and this is what being in your feminine means. And when it comes to dating, there's all these unspoken rules and no one's on the same page.
Yeah.
And I'm really curious because we were chatting before this episode, you know, how do we reclaim our femininity through the dating process? Yes, dating's the spiritual practice, but like, let's take it some steps further. And like, how do we really anchor into our feminine? How do we sit back and receive and observe and like,
Yeah, this is such a big topic because there's so many people with perspectives about this online. And the dating coach that I've been working with, I really like because she's not about rules. She's not about like, wait 3 dates until you sleep together or wait this long to text back. Her whole process with me has been getting me to trust myself enough to make those decisions on my own. I want to pause and reiterate that because there's so many people on Instagram and TikTok who want to tell you like, follow these 5 rules and you'll be in your feminine. And the feminine has no rules. Like the feminine's like chaos. And so for me, being in my feminine in dating is a level of receptivity. So when I'm speaking with men on the apps or if I meet someone out in the wild, it's really allowing them to initiate and make plans and to say like yes or no. And if a man isn't doing that, then he's not my man. I don't make him wrong or me wrong, but I just see that it's not a match because I want to be in my feminine when I'm dating.
mm-hmm.
And then the other part of it is really simple. It's being in your body. It's being connected to your senses. That to me is the gift that the feminine brings the masculine, is the feminine's presence with her sensuality, with the environment. And so dating in my feminine is being in my body while I'm on a date, talking about like how good things taste, you know, like my senses. And then also, and this is something that not everyone does that I've learned to do over the past year, and I think it's like one of my secret weapons, it is to acknowledge and thank men for what they've provided you.
Yes.
Whether that's on a date, at work, in life, even if a man just holds the door for you, you say, thank you. Thank you. And I think one of the biggest things I'd love to share is especially like on the online dating scene, you can go in with this very black and white approach of like, are you my man or are you not? And which is not a great vibe. Like the yogi in me has learned to reframe dating as a chance to meet another soul. And at the if it's the worst case scenario, I have sat with a person and the best thing that I can do is to highlight some part of them that I feel is divine. I loved the way that you made plans for us at this coffee shop and you bought me a latte. You know, I really appreciate the creativity. I told you about the guy who I went out with who told me to meet him at one coffee shop. And then he said, close your eyes, I'm taking you someplace else. And he took me to a different place. But there was this element of like creativity to it that I really appreciated. And I didn't feel a spark with him, but I acknowledged that. And so I think like being in your feminine is receiving, it's being in your body, and where appropriate, it is expressing admiration and respect and appreciation for the things that men do right. Because we spend a lot of time talking about the things that men do wrong. We spend a lot less time acknowledging what they do right. And the little bits of joy or safety that holding a door, that getting the check, that ordering you an Uber really bring you.
Oh, hallelujah. I am so glad you're talking about this because it is so easy to sit here and bash men. We've all done it. We've all done that. We've all been hurt or screwed over, whatever the case may be. And I really am starting to see, and this I think falls in line with manifesting. It's, you know, you create the version of reality you want to experience. And so, yes, it takes being like real with yourself and just acknowledging what you're dealing with. But then also, like, if you spin it and you're like, this person treats me really good, this person, and if just in your head you start to reprogram those thoughts, and if their actions don't align with what you're programming, and it make it very broad and simple, and like, this person really respects me and they show their respect and I feel respected. And because that was a big thing I was calling in a few months ago, right? And I was like, I just want to feel respected. And it just came in all these different forms. It doesn't have to come from just one person, but
Mhm.
that shift of mentality, especially when it comes to men. Do you have any tips or tricks on how to kind of reprogram your brain from like men are shit to like, yeah.
Yeah, big time. Because this is a huge, like, I had to do a belief system overhaul
Yes.
in order to show up differently. And it begins, I think, first with generalizing men.
Yeah.
Speaking about men as a monolith, there are a lot of men in the world. For me, the biggest shift was instead of saying men are X or Y, it's speaking about men as individuals.
Mhm.
Because it's so easy to have like one bad experience and then make a statement about 4 billion other beings on the planet. That doesn't make any sense.
And what do you think is going to keep happening to you? That statement you keep repeating in your head.
When you have that lens, and there's all sorts of reasons for that, the programming we experienced in our families of origin at school, Disney, you know, all these different things. And so I've become less interested in why a belief is there. It's like it got there.
Yeah.
And I want to shift it. So I think it starts with stopping generalizing about men at all. And I will say, one of the kind of sacrifices, or I don't love the word sacrifice, one of the offerings I have made to have a different experience in dating is to not bash men. And women connect quite a bit over bashing men. And like, I invite the listeners to just notice how easily it comes up between women to bash men. Yeah, it comes up a lot. And it's a source of connection between women.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I've learned to kind of look at what sometimes toxic behaviors are providing you with. And it's made me realize that bashing men will sometimes make me feel closer with women.
Yeah.
But then that's at the expense of the dating experiences that I want to have. So I've really cleaned up how I talk about men. And, you know, if someone says something about men that is sort of inviting me to say something negative, I really try to not take the bait, because I feel like energetically that is reinforcing to myself that men are something. And then when I go out and date and see that, it's all just like creating
Amplifying it, and you just get more and more of it. And we're such alchemists.
Yeah.
And what if we got together and we're like, these men, and actually we did that one time. We were going through like our Instagram crushes or men that were like, oh, he's a really good example of like healthy masculine I want to see more of.
Yes.
And then you start to see more of it.
Yes, exactly. So I have experienced pain as a result of men I've dated over the past year. And that doesn't that doesn't cancel out their good qualities.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the other interesting thing from a sort of spiritual perspective is that the men that we date or whomever we date can be mirrors of qualities that we are wanting to embody.
Mm.
And that's a big thing I learned. And so you can feel attracted to someone, but it may actually be because they have a part of themselves that you're wanting to bring in more of. And so seeing the good parts of men, even if there are other parts that are less great alongside that, I have great parts. I have also less great parts. You know, I think the other thing is like taking yourself off the pedestal a little bit and thinking that you're perfect and everyone else is wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, that's like the whole human journey. But really appreciating, like, I dated a guy last year. We called him the professor. And
yeah, and he brought back Tic Tacs for us, so shout out to that perk.
He always had mints on him, and I was like, that's a really good quality. And now I have Tic Tacs in my purse as a result of that. And the other thing about him was the way he just conducted himself at home. His space was clean. The second I would get into his apartment, he would tuck me into a corner of the couch with a blanket. He'd bring me a grapefruit sparkle water. He got me my favorite little sticker art book. He'd give it to me and he'd be like, do you need anything else? Are you good? And that, in a lot of ways, taught me how to treat myself better because he was so attentive. Materially, he was very much like an acts of service and gift giver. Emotionally, it was a different story. But
he was a Leo.
He was a Leo. Yeah. Period. The end. I love that you remember that. And so I really, really appreciated those qualities because I really integrated that. The Tic Tacs are proof of it, you know? And so I think really appreciating the qualities of men and then the changes that they may catalyze in you. The guy I dated after him was really vulnerable and authentic about his mental health journey on social media. And he was a masculine dude. And I was very inspired by that. And that started to invite more vulnerability in my writing. I'm talking about dating publicly now, which I wasn't a couple of months ago. And so I've started to kind of see the men that I've dated as these catalysts for parts of myself to come forth. And from that lens, I don't regret any experience. Did I feel pain as a result of those experiences? Yes. But that pain occurred alongside really rich wisdom, really deep integration, and qualities that I may not be embodying without having had those experiences.
So true. And it's been so just eye-opening to witness your experience this past year. So thank you for sharing with all of us. It, is so insightful for us to just hear other people's experiences and let it validate ours. And, I also want to touch on just women are waking up fast, and they have been, and we're coming together, and we're, our covens are growing. And I think men are sort of at this point where we're dating a generation that was shamed for crying or expressing emotions. And if we're constantly putting them down or having the lens that they're shit, they're not going to have the openness or vulnerability to tap into their emotions, which is ultimately what they need to do, whether it be before or during or after they date us, in order to meet us where we're at. Mm-hmm. And so we're seeing this, waking up of the divine feminine, but it's also going to happen in the male body. And to not, shame it is so important at this time.
Yeah. So here's a hot take. A lot of women say they want a man who is more in touch with their emotions. And yet, women do not always have the nervous system capacity to really hold space for the depth of a man's emotions. And I've heard this from men who I've dated, and they have shared with me vulnerably that when they have broken down in front of women, women have closed up. And that has been very traumatic for them, and then makes them a lot less inclined to want to open up. So I think we sometimes, again, and this is where I don't want to generalize with men, I will speak from my experience of the men I've dated. I think sometimes men have been vulnerable, but they have not been met. And I think that's where, as
Mhm.
feminine beings, we really need to check ourselves to make
Yeah.
sure, as much as we are putting on men that we want them to make us feel safe, are we making them feel safe? Are we making them feel safe, or are we emasculating them? And going back to the Queen's Code, which is the book I mentioned, that book talks a lot about the ways in which women can emasculate men unconsciously. And because of certain belief systems that we've picked up, it's very easy and sometimes feels natural to emasculate a man. And then that actually shuts off their ability to be authentic and vulnerable. So, in a lot of ways, we're kind of co creating
Mhm.
men's blocks with vulnerability. And so, I think as a part of kind of our work right now, it's really asking ourselves, like, am I creating a safe space for men to be vulnerable? And I'm lucky enough to be in a spiritual circle, which I've been in for a long time, probably about 6 years, with men, and learning how to hold space for a man who is
Mm.
inconsolable.
Mm.
Like when a masculine man is weeping and doesn't have all the answers, that is something I have had to learn, and also just like a muscle to kind of build, because there is something I think a little bit alarming to the feminine nervous system when you see a man who, like, you kind of project as supposed to be this strong provider. When he fully has his defenses down, you really have to or something I'm working on in myself is energetically being safe for him.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
don't think all women are there, as much as women say, I want a man to be emotional and vulnerable, you got to make sure you are showing up in a way that really creates a safe container for him to do that. And that's like, in a lot of ways, I think by having really beautiful masculine men in my life who have felt safe, um, I had a masculine yoga student walk up to me after a class I taught. It was around the election, and he just buried his face in my shoulder and wept.
Mm.
And we didn't even talk about what it was about. But for me, I felt very honored that he felt safe enough to do that. And I
Yeah.
think because I have consciously kind of like created that safety within myself, men feel it and are more inclined. But if there is like
Mhm.
one sort of action item or thing to look at in yourself and how you're approaching dating, and especially with masculine men, it's like, can I really be there for him to
Mhm.
break down and not be the strong one?
I think there's nothing hotter than watching a man be vulnerable and cry and to I mean, I feel so honored, to hold space in that way. So, yes, thank you for calling women out in that way because it needs to be said, you know?
Yeah, it needs to be reciprocal. And this is where coming back to creating emotional safety for yourself, I think, is at the top of the list for what to
Mhm.
do before you like download Hinge again. And this is, as much for me as anyone else. But like, can you really be safe with the full spectrum of your emotions?
Mhm.
Because when you can be, then you can provide that to your partner, you can provide that to your community, you can provide that to everyone. But that means coming to terms with sometimes parts of yourself that are really hard to claim.
Yeah.
Like, I've been called crazy. I've been called all sorts of things, and I've been judged for how I've dated. And as hard as all of that was, it was very important reflection, because I thought I was crazy and I
Mm.
was judging myself for how I was
Mm.
showing up. And so while those were searingly painful mirrors, they helped me get to a point where I get to claim I'm on a healing journey with anxious attachment. I get jealous. If you don't text me back in a certain window of time, that's going to have a certain impact on me. I need a certain level of emotional presence. And these are all things not too long ago that I would have died before admitting. And now I'm like, saying it is so liberating, and again, makes it so much easier to sift through anyone who isn't willing to provide that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not willing to provide that, that's okay. You know, I'm intense. That's something I can claim too. You know, it's a lot.
Yeah. All right, my crazy Scorpio. It's fun to hear you own that.
It is very liberating because I spent so long being, you know, very, very offended by that. As you would if you were called crazy, and now claiming that is just like, yeah, I mean, you know, I'll always keep healing, but I'll always keep being a little crazy. And my man is going to love it.
Oh, yeah.
He is going to savor every part of that crazy.
Why do I feel like his mom is like an Italian Catholic?
Oh,
did I just go there? Sorry.
Interesting.
Okay, but I'm so curious. How have you taken like the deepest, darkest, most painful situations or lessons and alchemize them? Because it sounds like you're pretty integrated in all of the experiences you've had, and it feels like such rich wisdom.
Yeah. That rich wisdom comes from some deep work. Let's talk about jealousy. Can't have two Scorpios together and not talk about jealousy.
Facts.
And honestly, claiming jealousy has been so helpful, and it's, you know, it's something I will always work on because I don't want it to be a problem. But I ended things with the professor. Let's see, I think it was over the summer, and I was pretty bummed because I thought that was going to be my man. Of course, in hindsight, I'm like, yeah, that was not it. And a friend of mine invited me to spend the weekend with her. She was like, you just got out of this breakup, you know, come, she lives in LA, and come down, spend some time together. She was in a really healthy, beautiful, conscious relationship. And I felt really excited to meet her man. And I went down and spent time with them. And her boyfriend was absolutely lovely, like just so generous with me, so attentive. And I found myself so jealous. So jealous. I mean, I don't get jealous as frequently anymore, but when I do, it is almost paralyzing.
And this I said to you, I'm like, this is envy. This is
envy. Yes.
This is jealousy, because jealousy is sort of like the baseline to like our existence, right? In our younger years, our less evolved years. But this envy was so palpable.
It turned my nervous system upside down. I mean, I had dinner with them and they were sitting next to each other, you know, kind of making eyes and eating off the same fork. And I could barely speak. And it was so shameful because my friend had gone through her whole healing journey, and all I wanted was to celebrate her, but I physically couldn't. And I ended up getting incredibly emotional and saying to her, like, I'm having this experience and I'm having a really hard time celebrating you, even though I want to. And I like expressed that. And our friendship ended. And that was a profound rock bottom, because the story I was telling myself at the time was my jealousy, my attachment, my stuff with dating was driving people away. And shortly thereafter was when I hired my dating coach and started to work with her. And, you know, one of the first things we did was really process that experience. And she's a trained hypnotherapist. And so she took me through this process of figuring out why I felt the depth of envy. And it was because my friend and her partner were showing me my destiny. They were showing me exactly what I was wanting and getting closer to. But jealousy and envy separate you from what you're seeing and make you feel like you're not worthy of it. But once I released the jealousy and the envy, my dating coach was like, you're just seeing exactly how you and your man are going to be. And that was wild. That was a major moment of seeing my jealousy and my envy as a compass. The fact that it ended the friendship sucked, but I also, when I was really honest with myself, realized that there were some underlying issues in the relationship that made it not strong enough to withstand. Because if the relationship had been healthier, we would have had the container to process it, and we didn't have that. So coming to terms with that and not making myself wrong in that, I think was like one of the most pivotal moments, because after that I was like, I'm a leper. Like, you know, my relationships aren't working out. I'm scaring friends away. Like, and moving through that and really just claiming again that I have these jealous and envious parts that will come up, but that all that they're showing me is something that I'm working toward, and it's on me to release the separation from it, helps me now see jealousy in a much different way and helps me get a lot dysregulated from it than I had in the past. Because what's so regulating about jealousy and envy isn't just the emotions themselves, but the shame and trying to repress it.
Yep.
So having a safe container to say, I feel really jealous of this person is so important, because there's so many gems in that. So that was one thing. Another really challenging moment that I alchemized was after I broke things off with the last guy I dated. I did a little bit of that spiritual bypassy thing where I was like, it's done. We unfollowed each other. I'm fine. And then I find myself probably like 2 or 3 weeks afterwards, I'm sitting at home and I was just overcome with missing him. And I went onto his Instagram. Dun, dun, dun. Like, miss boundaries over here, miss like clear the space. And I'm just like, oh my God, I miss you. Oh my God, I miss you. And I was on his Instagram for long enough to feel like total trash. And I got off, I like got stoned, ate a bunch of snacks, fell asleep on the couch, and just woke up feeling like terrible about myself because I was missing him. But then I like broke this agreement I had with myself to keep the distance. And I started voice noting with my dating coach. And I was like, I feel so much shame about this, but here's what happened. And she took me through this process and she was like, okay, I hear that you're missing him and feeling drawn to him, but what is it that's like pulling you onto his Instagram? And he was a pro athlete. What did you call him? WWF. WWF. He was a pro fighter. And he posted a lot about his focus and his discipline and his commitment to fighting. And I was telling her that, and she's like, okay, so like, tell me more about that. And basically my dating coach helped me unpack what was really pulling me in was his focus and his discipline and his connection to his purpose. And at the time I was in this kind of weird in-between space with my purpose. And once it clicked for me that he once again was showing me my destiny, that was probably like a month before my retreat. And you saw me, I like took off with marketing that retreat. I ended up selling it out. I ended up doing all this promotion, and I found the energy when I had that moment of realizing that he was showing me something that I needed. And if there's like one takeaway, it's to see dating not just as this like black and white experience of like, are you my husband or are you not? But as an experience to like see parts of yourself in another being that you either have or want to have more of, and to let that inspire you.
Yes.
To let that help you grow and evolve. And even if you only go on one date, or even if you date for months and it's still really painful, there's all these lessons and little parts that you get to take with you that I think are net positive.
I love that. I love turning jealousy into inspiration.
Yes, so good. Because if you just stay down in the shame and darkness with jealousy, you can't do anything with it. But by claiming it and realizing it's a part of you, you get to work with it, turn it into something.
Mm-hmm. Most of my 20s and, while being in relationship was plagued by my partners, past partners, and like being envious of their relationships. And I'm like, if it was that great, they wouldn't be single or they wouldn't be dating other people. And I was just so like stuck in the past. And I really do find that, when you are able to pinpoint exactly what it is that you're finding inspiration from, you are so present. And that gift that you're giving yourself is just amplifying your magic, amplifying your manifestations. Such a beautiful act of love for yourself.
It really is. And in my current process while I'm single, another thing that I'm very attuned to is parts of other people's relationships that I want.
Yes.
Luckily, I've worked through the jealousy, so I feel less jealousy. But when I see couples that embody a certain vibe or a certain dynamic, I really pay attention to that because I'm like, yeah, I want some of that. Or we have a mutual friend who had a partnership, and I went to the farmer's market with her and her man at the time. And I've told her how much this impacted me, but he forgot his wallet. So he didn't have any money on him. But we're walking around this farmer's market, and there were these bath bombs that he knew that she loved. So he figured out like Apple Pay or some virtual way of paying that like wasn't immediately convenient to pay the vendor so that he could buy his woman her bath bombs. And I just remember seeing that and being like, oh, I want that. And then several months later, I was at the farmer's market with the professor, and he walks by this stand of peonies, and he was like, give me a second. And he ended up buying them and giving them to me. And it was like, I took this little snapshot of that moment with my friends and then kind of recreated it. I mean, I didn't tell the professor that I liked peonies, that there was like some sort of intuitive magic happening there. But I think really zooming in on things that you see in others, first of all, helps me move away from jealousy, because I could have been really jealous in that moment and been like, oh, that's them, that's never going to happen for me. But instead I chose to allow it to expand my consciousness and to also expand my excitement of just like, oh yeah, my man's going to have that and he's going to buy me this. And like, that is where you can put your energy when you're single, instead of they're in love and I'm not, or it's never going to happen for me. This is where you can like direct your energy and your witchy powers instead of self-loathing and feeling lack and all that sort of thing.
Or even in relationship, the comparison, right? We already touched on social media, painting this image of the way we think things should be or could be. And it takes you out of the present. It takes you out of like the reality of the magic that you're probably already experiencing, and like takes you off your narrative. Like, own your story, create your story the way you want it to be, and look for the gems and nuggets of inspo along the way.
Yeah. And let it be a love story. As cheesy as that sounds, in my spiritual circle, I've been in it for about 6 years, and the people in that circle have heard dozens of my dating experiences and seen me through the excitement, the middle, and the end. And a woman in my group said to me at one point after something ended, and I honestly was just at a point of like, I don't know how to keep moving. Like, I don't know how I can let my heart break yet again. And she said, Phoebe, witnessing you, it kind of feels like a fairy tale. And it's like watching this queen, this princess, meet different suitors and go on these adventures and have these experiences. And so I think remembering that like this can be your fairy tale, and fairy tales aren't interesting without unexpected twists and turns and signs and all these different things. And if you really allow for it to unfold and for it to be a love story, you know, as much as like you want to meet your man, the whole build up to it is such an exciting part of it and the story that you'll want to tell. And so that's another way that I've really reframed this process to take off the pressure of like, oh, how many more dates is it going to take? How many more relationships? It's just like, it's an unfolding story. And that feels so much better than trying to have it on some timeline that I think should be happening. And when I don't know the timeline, that's not my job. That's the universe's job. My job is to heal and show up and, you know, see the good in people and learn how to move through pain, you know, with more and more grace. And then with that, like, there's nothing really to worry about besides the story unfolding.
And enjoy yourself.
Yeah, it's so true. And that I think can be hard to hear when you're really frustrated, you're really heartbroken. You know, I think something that I notice with spiritual women is they can be so holy and devout in all aspects of their life except for dating. And it's like they choke off the spirituality with dating. So spirit can't enter the chat. And so allowing dating to be a part of your spiritual practice. And what do I mean by that? Like breathing while you're on Hinge. And that's another thing I actually want to touch on. Speaking of seeing the good in men, if I go on to Hinge and my attitude is like, ew, gross, loser, get away from me, already went on a date with you, that's not the best vibe. And I've been there. And it brings forth more people that elicit that sort of response for me. So when I go on Hinge, I make sure I'm in like a pretty good energy. I do my best not to go on when I'm like needing validation or feeling desperate. Like I do my best to kind of like fill up and like take care of myself. And then I do my best to see the good in the men's profiles and to acknowledge how vulnerable it is to have a dating profile and to be like, okay, you're not for me, but like cool shoes, you know, and to just like go in with a positive vibe, because it is just so easy to be really negative and to be like, the dating apps suck, you know, dating in your 30s sucks. And then have that reflected back to you, you know? So if we're as witchy and powerful as we say we are, like we need to bring that into the experience of dating and see dating apps as a mirror.
And to me, it feels like you've stepped out of the fun house with all of the mirrors being like all wonky in every which way and making you look contorted. And you're like, okay, I'm going to choose what kind of mirror I'm looking into right now. And it's going to be the most magnificent, magical fairy tale mirror.
Yes. Yeah.
And here's the story that will unfold.
Exactly. And the men I attract are beautiful men. And even the ones where things don't work out, we will have really conscious completion conversations. And that's something I did want to touch on.
Yeah.
One thing that has, I guess I do have a rule. I do not ghost people. I take a moment, even if it was a very brief coffee date, to thank the man who has taken me out for his time, for buying me a coffee, for showing up. And I will, if you're looking for just like a template text message to say, I'll say something like, hey, I just wanted to say thank you for meeting me at this coffee shop yesterday and for getting me my favorite lavender latte. And then I'll say something like, I really loved how we connected over both loving yoga and hating camping. This is my dream. And then I'll say something like, at the moment, it's not feeling aligned for me to pursue anything further, but I appreciate your time, your effort, your energy, and best wishes with, whatever project or thing was coming up. You do it with grace. You thank people for their time. And what I notice from that is then I get an equally as thoughtful response.
Mm.
A lot of men I have gone out with recently will ask for feedback. They'll be like, is there anything I could have done differently? Is there anything that you think would help me in dating moving forward? And that's when I usually highlight something that I really liked. Like the guy who had me close my eyes and guided me to another place. I was like, thank you for being creative with that. First dates are kind of awkward. I appreciated that. And treating the people you go out with as people and as souls, not choking off your spiritual practice because you've met someone through a dating app, treating them as another being who is opening their heart and going through a whole healing journey. That to me feels a lot better than ghosting, unmatching, and being like, ew, I can't believe I just went out with this person, ugh. So it takes, like, I am inviting the spiritual girlies to upgrade their emotional maturity in dating. And that, that comes at a cost of not bashing men, of saying thank you, of appreciating qualities, even if they're not your husband, highlighting those and being like, thank you. And that also makes moving on to the next experience a lot more seamless than like telling a bunch of stories like all men in Portland are terrible, all men that I attract are terrible, I'm terrible. It makes for just a like, hey, that was an experience and I am open to the next thing.
First off, thank you so much for being here today and sharing all of your beautiful wisdom with us. I love you so much, and I am just so in awe of watching your dating evolution, and showing up with grace is something the world needs so deeply right now. So thank you for being you.
Thank you. And thank you for witnessing me. You've seen a lot of these experiences play out when I have been a lot less graceful in processing them. And that to me is like the richness of really strong female friends is you've been there for me when I've been a lot less polished, a lot more triggered, when I haven't had a nice little bow wrapped around the lessons. And that just makes the process a lot easier to manage, to know that if worst case scenario, something doesn't work out and I get to process it with you in the sauna, like I can live with that. And so thank you.
All right. Phoebe's one of my favorite yoga teachers. Actually, you are my favorite yoga teacher here in Portland. If folks want to follow you, get a hold of you, come to your class.
Yes. Yeah. So the easiest way to connect with me is on Instagram. My handle is Phoebe Schiff Yoga. And in my Instagram link, you can register for my newsletter. You get a free meditation.
Oh,
when
yes.
you do that.
I love your newsletters.
Yes. So that's the best way to stay updated on things that I have going on. The other way to connect with me is I do have a YouTube channel. I also have my playlists on Spotify. And then the biggest thing coming up for me is I don't think I've even told you this yet.
No.
So this is exciting. February 15th in Portland, I am leading a mini retreat at one of our favorite sauna cold plunge places in Vancouver. It is called Connect Wellness, and we're going to be doing just about an hour of asana and meditation, and then a 2-hour soak and sauna sesh. This is like a place we go to process whatever's happening in life, and just like one of my absolute favorite places. So if you're interested in that, you can send me a message on Instagram. I'll be posting about it and sharing about it on my newsletter. But, being very consistent with my yoga practice as I do get back on the dating scene, it feels immensely important because yoga for me helps me to digest and metabolize life and move through stuff quicker. So if you are moving through things, whether they're dating related or not, come find your spot on the mat with me.
All right, now get out of here so we can snack. We love you. Thank you. See you next week.
See you next week.